All right, it is 6 p.m. August the 1st. The Forest Lake Airport Commission will come to order. And Mr. Schmidt, would you please take roll?
Mr. Ashback.
Present.
Mr. Dahlbeck. Mr. Eigner. Mr. Ship.
Here.
And Mr. Steeler.
Present.
We've got a quorum.
Yeah, Tim had called and said that he had a meeting he had to go to, an appointment, so he wasn't able to make it.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any corrections or additions to last meeting's minutes? I did not have any. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Commissioner Ashbeck makes a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second it.
And Mr. Ship seconds it. Motion, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Minutes are approved from last meeting. Next on the agenda is Bolton and Mink. Silas Parmar is here.
Well, thanks, Mr. Steeler, for having me again. Everyone has a copy of kind of an update memo?
Yes.
Well, on number one, kind of brought this to the commission at the June commission meeting to look at putting in hardwired obstruction lights on the 3 power poles under the 3-1 approach. As you guys are all aware, the light poles there are not obstructions to the airspace. However, MnDOT has recommended lighting them for safety reasons and has come forth with funding on the project. Since that meeting in June, Mr. Undum has received confirmation from MnDOT that they do have additional funds available to pay for the hardwired obstruction lights. The initial cost estimate was for solar lights at $10,000. I put together an estimate for hardwire lights, which would be connected to your runway edge lighting circuit so that the obstruction lights come on, at dusk as your other lighting on the airport comes about. The cost estimate is $25,000. The state share would be 90%, so $22,500, and the local share for the city would be $2,500. So with that, Mr. Undum, are we looking for a commission to proceed with the project here?
Yeah, we need a motion basically approving allowing us to proceed with it. When I reached out to MnDOT, I spoke with Dan and he agreed to adjust because the original funding grant cycle came back at 10,000. I sent him a copy of the new estimate at 25. He said no problem adjusting it. So if the commission desires us to go forward with that, we just need a motion.
Do we have a motion to move forward with the lighting at that price?
Mr. Chair, I'd make a motion to recommend to the City Council to move forward with the proposal as presented.
Commissioner Ashbeck makes a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Commissioner Ship seconds the motion. Is there any other discussion on the item?
Yeah, I'm sorry for number one for coming late. Just traffic was tough, but anyways, as far as the lighting is concerned, I would much rather prefer the solar lighting for $10,000 less, or $15,000 less, actually.
In our earlier discussions, the solar lighting was not going to be able to be tied into the wiring.
Correct.
For future needs. So correct. The hard wire was preferred in that sense. So I think I would prefer the hard wiring for that.
I'm just thinking going forward, that maintenance on hardwire versus the solar. Solar would be cheaper. And that also that going forward, and Dan, I think, will speak tonight to the budget going forward, that any funds that we save would be a plus.
And I guess maybe Silas could speak to the difference in maintenance costs, long term between the two different, types of systems.
Well, the upfront maintenance cost for a solar light is essentially zero. Once it's installed, you get an LED fixture on the light. It's up to the sun to power up the system. The difference between the two is essentially when you do the hardwired light, say like right now, if someone clicks up the runway circuit, the obstruction lights would come on, whereas the solar lights may not, depending on the sensitivity of the sensor on there. In relation to maintenance on the hardwired obstruction lights, depending on how long the light bulb is rated for, obviously you'd have to get someone with a cherry picker to go up there and replace the bulb if they go out. The system that's installed, it's cable and conduit all the way to the light poles there, so the probability of rodents getting in there and cutting the line is pretty slim. And then it's connected to your runway circuit, so as long as there's no issues with your runway circuit, you shouldn't have any issues, with the obstruction lights there. But, I can understand where Mr. Eigner is coming from. There is additional maintenance costs longer term with installing the hardwired lights compared to the solar. You just have to weigh it against the benefits of anyone coming in there. If you click up the runway circuit,
But if I understand it correctly, under solar, those obstruction lights would be on all the time in the evening? Is that not true?
Well, under solar, they come on with the photo eye when it reports that, okay, it's
dark.
It's evening, it's dark essentially.
But they stay
correct.
on. You don't, it
Correct.
wouldn't be something that you're clicking when an airplane's coming or not coming?
No, that's correct. They come
So,
on. Whereas
I don't
the-
see any advantage to having them click on when a plane comes.
They come on providing there's enough charge for them to come on, and they'll stay on it for as long as the charge lasts, but
That is correct.
unless there was a lot of cloudy weather or something like that, you would think they'd handle most of the evening.
I just see a lot of the city things when there's construction sites and they have these warning signs and all your informational signs, they're all solar powered. I don't see that as an issue.
The motion is to approve moving forward with the hardwired plan as presented. That's the motion.
All right, we'll put it to a vote. All in favor of moving forward with the hardwired plan, say aye.
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 No?
We have one no. Motion carries.
All right, so am I to assume the project is a decision to move forward, or will it go to council?
Yeah, I gotta verify, I gotta, confirm where the sequencing is, but from this point, we'll take it to the next level. I'll work
Sure.
with Silas to get that pathway established and move forward.
All right, on to number 2 with the approach procedure survey. The request has been made on Forest Lake's behalf. Melissa Underwood from our office has submitted that paperwork, and we haven't been able to receive an update from the FAA on where that progress stands. So once we have more information on that, we'll report back to you. But it's been pretty common from our experiences this year, trying to get flight procedures to respond back in terms of where they are in approach development. They've been pretty tight-lipped about that process. Typically, it takes 18 to 24 months, and that request was put in, I want to say, earlier this year. So we don't have any information, but as soon as we do, we'll make sure that you guys are updated on getting a GPS approach to each end. Any questions on that front? All right, kind of number 3, I'll go over quickly. As you guys are all aware, there's some concerns with the drainage in between the runway and the taxiway, and the project was listed on your CIP, but MnDOT did not allocate funding for that project in their fiscal year 19. Some of the conversations that I've had with Dan Berner, your MnDOT engineer, MnDOT's thoughts on the project, they kind of see it go either way, whether it was a design issue or if it's a problem that just arose, that would have arose regardless of whatever the design was. But for those reasons, they did not allocate funding for that project this year. Doesn't mean we can't try again in their fiscal year 20 to have that project kind of move forward there. Any questions about
No.
that one?
Why does it exist? If it was all engineered and everything else and we paid for it, why does this problem exist?
The review that Bolton & Mank has completed, myself and Ryan Goodman, city engineer, went out there last year and visited the site. And what was apparent, in our opinion, is that there's no outlet for the surface drainage in that area in question. It's about a 2,000-foot long stretch where it was a kind of an infiltration basin, essentially, that was constructed at level grade, where the idea was infiltration would occur, which hasn't been the case. And in talking to Mr. Undum and some of the maintenance staff that Mr. Goodman has spoken with, they've had difficulty even mowing the area just because of the saturation. But if you kind of continue north, kind of past the Pappies, there is drain tile that exists there, which eventually flows north and through a series of ditch checks and outlets before it gets to Clear Lake. So the Bolton & Mank opinion is if there was drain tile that was put in to that 2,000-foot stretch, you wouldn't be experiencing the problems that you're faced with there. Some correspondence that we've received from Mr. Undum and his staff through conversations with the previous airport consultant. What we've heard is that there wasn't sufficient budget to continue extension of the drain tile, so that's what this project would have completed, was the extension of the drain tile.
But wasn't that in the original plan to put that drain tile in?
From my review of the plans, it was not. It was constructed the way you see it out there right now, Mr. Shipp, with the flat area where infiltration was expected to account for the surface drainage. Any other questions or comments?
Nope.
All right, then kind of under the new item here with the pavement management program. Since the meeting in July, Mr. Undum informed me that the city was looking to put a plan together to kind of protect the investment that you guys have made out there with paving the runway and the taxiway. So he asked if I could put together kind of a draft pavement management program so you guys have something to react to. So what you see in here is a 20-year program. That's essentially what MnDOT and FAA pavement life expectancy is. Obviously, if you follow through with the management plan, you'd hope to get more than 20 years out of the new construction that you put in. So what you essentially see is what Bolton and Mank recommends for not only other airports, but even just municipal roads that we work on, is every 3 years, looking at completing crack sealing for sure to prevent surface drainage from migrating into the subgrade of the pavement, but then also looking at the application of a seal coat, every 3 years and then 5 years thereafter, where what you're trying to do with the seal coat is essentially protect the asphalt binder, which is within the bituminous pavement itself. I mean, not to get too technical, but that's essentially the oil that's in your bituminous to keep the pavement flexible. If that dries out, becomes rigid, then your surface starts to crack and deteriorate, whereas there's products that are available that you can penetrate the asphalt binder and keep it flexible and keep it from becoming rigid. So you can see on the plan here that it goes through 2038 with looking at a substantial rehabilitation of the project. For now, we've listed all the projects as state funded as 80% state, 20% local. Currently, through 2019, the state has committed 90% funding for projects, but we don't know come 2020 if they're going to remain at 90%. Previously, for state-funded airports, there was 80% state, 20% local. So the plan, as Mr. Undum and I spoke today, is if the commission here kind of agrees here with the program, we would put this on your actual 20-year CIP moving forward and put that in there for request for state funding. If state funding doesn't come available in 1 year, the most cost advantageous is to try again the following year. Your other avenue to get crack repair and seal coating done is using your maintenance and operations budget, which is covered at 75% state, 25% local. However, from review of records, the city exhausts their complete maintenance and operation budget with maintenance of the airport. So that includes snow plowing, maintenance, mowing, the whole works there. And I know Dan's got some additional figures here that he was going to discuss.
Yeah, just to kind of build off what Silas was saying there is, so what I did this afternoon was took the information he sent. One of the reasons why we asked for the 20-year pavement management was that in the past CIP, we never had to account for maintenance of a paved runway. It was always, this is basically a new expense. I wanted to make sure that as we started going into budget, as we're looking at the budget for 19, there was that shortfall that was identified at the last meeting. And the way that could be addressed was reduce the amount that would have to go into the capital improvements. Basically the amount of money that we reserve every year for the match for what MnDOT offers. So what I did this afternoon was looked back at the numbers and kind of figured out, realistically, we could probably do $20,000 a year into CIP, into our reserve account. So when we have to do our match for a MnDOT grant, that's probably the amount that we can do on current budget, what we can put into that fund. But wanted to see how does that interplay with now we have this new additional expense or these new maintenance costs that are associated with the hardtop runway that we need to account for. So what we did is there's a spreadsheet in front that has some graphs on the bottom. That's what I ended up doing for that one was that is basically just if all the CIP projects going forward are strictly runway specific, so no other CIP projects. I wanted to see, does $20,000 a year cover our cost match for those projects? And also not knowing what MnDOT's funding, breakdown is gonna be in future years. Is it gonna be 80-20, 90-10, or are they not gonna fund these projects? I kinda wanted to run the realistic, probably 80-20, best case scenario 90-10, and, absolute worst case scenario, if MnDOT stops funding, we still have to potentially pay for these projects, and just kind of looking at, worst case scenario, what's the, the offset. So that's what that far right column is, with all the red on it. That's if the city had to basically pay for the full project. I think realistically, we're gonna be somewhere between that 80-20, 90-10, The good news is that starting with a fund balance of zero at $20,000 a year for the next 20 years, at 90-10 funding, the city, we would be able to make sure that we have enough in the account to cover that match for all the projects. However, if you look at the 80-20, we're covered for the next 10 years. However, there are 2 years where there is a deficit that's projected in the middle of those 2 years. And then we kind of dig out, have a small fund balance again, and then go right back into deficit. And at the end of this whole project, when we have to do the full reclamation in 20 years, at that point, you're looking at a deficit of approximately $331,000. Now, those numbers can shift. I'm just kind of presenting that's probably,
Are these this is based on, the income side of this is based on just the hangars out there now and not any new development of additional hangars?
Basically, at this point, what I needed a starting point to do the projections, right?
Right.
So I went through, and this is the first year that we have full hangar builds out as it currently sits. Looked at it just from the standpoint of what we put away this year. If we bring that forward, I didn't do any increases in operation expenses, didn't cover any increases in other expenses. Considering that I also didn't increase if the rent increases in 2 years of CPI adjust, figuring that those increases will probably offset with increased operation costs. So, there's a little bit, these aren't hard and fast numbers that you could take and, these numbers could shift. I just kind of wanted to see, are we close? Where are we sitting at if we just do payment management? If MnDOT keeps going on with the 90-10 funding and we follow this strategy as Silas lays out, we are able to cover all the expenses without having to run into a deficit. The 80-20, there's a couple of years in there, but I think they're far enough down the road where we could anticipate where we're kind of sitting, have a better picture where we're at. The one thing that's a little bit concerning is, again, 20 years down the road, we still have that $330,000 deficit at 80-20, which would need to be addressed at some point, whether or not we increase the amount that goes into the capital, or if MnDOT comes back and changes their funding strategy down there. I just kind of wanted to put that out there just as an awareness for the commission's sake, as other CIP projects come forward too, that's going to take away from the amount that's reserved for pavement management. So the second spreadsheet that's out in front that has a lot more red on it is what I did for this one was basically took the CIP plan that was sent into MnDOT with all the funding on there. Now, some of these projects already on this one are already not funded or will not happen, probably won't happen. But I wanted to say, based on our approved current CIP, now with the addition of the pavement CIP, where do we land at current funding? If you take the same $20,000, and even at 90-10 funding, we basically, we run out of funds in 2023. So when you start tacking in other CIP projects that are on the CIP plan, that significantly reduces how solvent this fund will stay in future years. Again, at 80-20, you basically have 1 year worth of funding and then you're in the red. So I did kind of just an estimate saying, okay, let's just say MnDOT maintains 90-10 funding, we go forward with CIP as it's presented. What level of funding do we need to maintain? Now, granted, I just kind of shot a number in the dark here. There's a lot of adjustments that could be made, but at 90-10 funding, we would need to contribute approximately $50,000 a year to the capital improvement fund to fund pavement management and all the CIP. So just kind of goes to show, the recommendation is obviously we have incurred maintenance costs now because of the runway. You want to be able to protect that asset to make sure that we're not just kind of bringing on additional CIP items, additional capital purchases at the expense of the maintenance of the runway. The positive side is if MnDOT maintains 90-10 funding and we kind of, put the brakes on a little bit of the other CIP projects, the funds look good.
Yeah, that was the point I was gonna bring up. It includes everything on here, so we could adjust this and it could make it a more positive
Correct.
outcome.
And I would say the thing I would probably proceed with, I would proceed with the 80-20 kind of funding strategy in mind, with the thought that if all of a sudden in 2023, they're coming back at 90-10, that reserve will be bigger, and then we can potentially slot in another CIP project or ask for another CIP. I mean, I think, you know, in talking to Silas, MnDOT kind of likes the idea of doing maintenance projects for their runways because, again, they're maintaining, is showing that we want to maintain the asset that's out there. We want to make sure that it doesn't fall in disrepair. But that also kind of comes at the expense of some of the other capital improvement projects that are there. So, I mean, the recommendation would be to kind of maybe put the approved projects kind of on the shelf right now, focus on the pavement management strategy, and then adjust as where we're kind of going. But the positive news out of the whole analysis that was done is that, you know, at current funding levels, which 20,000 is an attainable number within current budgets, that there's enough funding there if MnDOT maintains 90-10 or even 80-20 to basically take care of the pavement management for the next 10 years.
Does the DOT have any records of what it's cost these other airports that have had pavement for a long time? $2 million to repair a half a mile of runway just seems ridiculous. I mean, we aren't paying anywhere near that for our public streets.
Well, I mean, again, Silas is the one that came up with the original. I mean, I don't know what formula you use for. I mean, I'm not trying to discuss Silas's work, but those are the numbers that we looked at, kind of like what the strategy would be moving forward.
And those are out a number of years, is that correct?
But I will say the numbers that you see here are erring on the side of caution, so they are going to be higher than what's realistically expected, and that's just for budgetary purposes. And going out 20 years, I couldn't tell you what the price of per ton per bituminous is going to be, but I would agree, you know, if you looked at redoing the runway now, it's not going to cost you $2 million. But also these numbers also include the taxiway and going towards your apron as well. So all the new pavement that was constructed.
And one thing too, when you look at the revenues, the fund balance revenues, that does not take into account if there's any interest accrued on that account. That is just strictly 20,000. It's a very simple equation because they don't want to go through and start adding all those other variables in, you know, at first.
This is a very rough,
very rough,
conservative look.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where I would say,
Yeah,
you know,
it looks
if you're on the
relatively
80-20
good.
strategy,
Yeah.
you know, you're probably going to be, the fund balance is probably going to grow above that, but I just wanted to kind of present a conservative estimate
Yeah.
to start with.
That was going to be my next question. If we increase the 20,075 by just 0.75% per year, it would change the way they look. It might not change it much more favorably under the 80-20 projection, but
Correct, or if you even account for, say that fund balance hits 100,000, you're getting 3% interest, or $3,000 a year interest
Right,
that's going in there,
right,
that's,
yeah.
you know, that starts to accumulate, so we're not taking it, I mean, I didn't do that level of analysis, I mean, you could get to the point where if we know MnDOT's paying X and we know what our contribution is gonna be for every year, then you could probably get to a little bit more detail, but trying to predict 20 years out what bituminous costs are gonna be, you know, you're kind of.
Commissioner Ashbeck, you had?
So, yeah, I was just looking at one item because I thought we were projecting out payment rehabilitation on the CIP, and I don't know, Dan or Silas. So in 2031, we have a pavement rehabilitation in the CIP. So my question is, was that removed with this better projection put in, or is that just an item that would be pulled off?
So there was actually one, and I missed the one in 2031, so the projection's going, but that far out. But there was a payment in 2026 in the CIP that I did, if you see there's a little color on, I colored that cell.
Yep.
I did pull out, there's $100,000 in CIP, I removed that for duplication. I did not catch the one that was so far, but the numbers at that point, when you combine the whole things, were so far in the red that I was kind of like, you know.
Yeah, I understand, so.
Councilman Eigner, you had a?
Yeah, I'm just curious, isn't that, according to Silas's projection, 2029 is going to be an expensive year, no matter how we fund it?
That's based on the mill and overlay
Right,
that would have to
right.
be redone at that time. 11
Correct.
years ago.
So your projections, Dan, that would not cover the 2029?
If MnDOT does 90-10 funding, and we maintain that $20,000 a year level, in 2029, if all we're doing is payment management, we are able to account for that cost within current CIP.
But in either case, in 2029, this estimated number is a real number, so in 2029, we would be relying on 90% from MnDOT.
Correct. I mean, and again, this is more, these projections were more just done in terms of, you know, seeing if where does 20,000 land you? You know, now granted, there's still variables that are way outside of the control of, you know, this analysis, you know, and which I would probably say, you know, you're looking at probably the more realistic number of, you know, the 80-20 funding, which I think the caution is that in 10 years down the road, there is that deficit that's there. But, you know, the 5-year outlook, you know, we'll know more in 5 years where we're going to sit, you know, and the reality is in 3 years, we may not have to do a full, you know, MnDOT may not come in and fund seal coat and crack fill. So then we just basically keep accruing that capital until we get the funding mechanism. I think the benefit about putting this plan in place now, while the asset is relatively new and in good state of repair, is that if MnDOT does not come forward with funding in say 21 and they do it in 22, 23, we're not so far out of the, you know, window of when you want to do that maintenance that we're at, you know, we're basically having to incur extra maintenance costs. I think if we get it the year we want it, that's great, then we're on that good maintenance strategy. But if we're delayed 1 or 2 years, I think there's enough buffer built in that that'll account for that as we move forward.
I think these are great documents. I mean, we have a CAP, so we know how we need to manage and grow and improve the airport. But now we've got a baseline, you know, that helps us understand the impacts of them. So I'm really appreciative of this information, and it's clear that the next CIP, we've got some discussions to, you know.
Okay.
I mean, again, the recommendation for the next CIP would be take this pavement management strategy and give it, and try to incorporate that or get that incorporated into it. So then, you know, we're not maybe necessarily having discussion points on something that, because the other thing you need to realize too, every other one of these capital improvements that get brought on, there are increased maintenance costs too. So that 20,000 would need to be increased to cover, you know, ongoing maintenance costs, or your operations costs are going to increase with every asset that comes online. So, I mean, it's kind of that balancing act of, I think what they're showing is their solvency within the airport commission, or airport fund to account for the maintenance projects, but you bring on 3 or 4 other big capital improvement projects, and all of a sudden these numbers, that red number creeps up a lot sooner in, and you're running at a, you know, an operating loss every year.
Silas, with the other 125 or 30 airports that MnDOT manages in a similar fashion, when it comes to pavement management, have they typically been 90-10 historically? Have they gone 80-20?
Well, there's two separate-
I could see other items like the lighting and those things that they would go 80-20 on, but I would think pavement, when they've put the money into the investment in there, that they, I'm just historically, have they veered from 90-10 on that?
So how it is, so MnDOT has 2 separate funding mechanisms. Either you're part of the NIPIAS, which means you're in the federal system of airports where you're eligible to receive federal funding. So if you're one of those airports, MnDOT will fund any project that's state only at a different rate. But as Forest Lake's case, you guys are state funded only airports, so they'll fund your projects at a higher rate. So for this current biennium, 18 and 19, they've already allocated what their funding rates will be for a project. So construction projects, so that could be anything that's involved with construction. You know, your proposed either hardwired or solar lights would be 90-10. Any pavement maintenance management is 90-10. Anything that falls under construction is going to be funded at 90-10. They don't assign different rates for different types of construction projects. Now, if it's equipment, SR or snow removal equipment, planning, those, they have different rates that are there. But I'll send you their information, or I'll email it to Mr. Undum tomorrow, and you can distribute it so you can kind of see what their rates are. But that's kind of how they operate their funding. So, you know, as Dan mentioned, you know, we don't know what the state's going to fund airports come fiscal year 2020, which is calendar year 2019, come July 1st, but that should come out early next year.
Hasn't the history of the state funding been 80-20 all the way until this last year or two, when they got this money back from the legislature that was taken away from them?
Correct. Once they received the repayment of the $5.5 million in state fiscal year 15, the state then was under, you know, the state was under guidance from legislature that you need to spend that money within the next 2 bienniums, which is how they allocated their funding scenario. So now it's been successful having the additional funding within the state aeronautics. So they've been working on the legislature to increase the funding that's made available for state funding on airports, and they've also tried to kind of keep the funding rates where they are. If you're aware, you know, it used to be 2/3, 1/3 was your maintenance and operation grant. They bumped that up to 75/25. Like you mentioned, Mr. Schitt, they used to fund projects, for state only at 80/20, and if you're federal airport, 70/30, and they've increased that as well.
So they got back about 5 out of the 15 million that the legislature took from them, right? So they got another 10 million that they're supposed to get back.
My understanding is the first biennium, they had like 5.5 million, and then they've gotten more of that back. I'm not sure if they've gotten the full 15 million return, but my understanding is they've gotten some of that funds back with the surplus that the state has experienced.
So you feel that level of participation by the state is going to stay at that height, or it's going to go back to the old 80/20?
I'm uncertain how that would go. Without the legislature providing there's MnDOT Aeronautics additional funding to keep the rates at which they are at, I don't know how they could support the higher rates, because at the same time they're also for federal airports, like federal airports funded are 90% federal, 10% local, while the state is covering half the local share. So if you're completing a federal project, it's 90 federal, 5 state, 5 local, and that takes quite a share of their budget as well. So if you just look at the numbers, you'd find it hard to believe they can keep the rates at what they're at. But I know that's their goal at MnDOT, to keep the funding rates as they have the past 4 years.
Anybody else have any questions for Silas?
Thank you.
Number 4 on the agenda, the Pappies. I understand they are in operation now, is that correct?
That's my understanding. I haven't tried them, but they had the flight test, was it last Thursday when I sent the email out?
Yeah.
Silas, did you learn anything if you don't know anything other than they're in operation too, correct?
All I've heard from John is that the flight check passed as well, same
Okay.
thing that I heard from you. So
Yep, yep,
he did what he needed to get them fixed. I think he just changed out some boards as well,
yep.
and now they're operational, so that's good.
I came in a couple of nights before and it would have been nice to have them, but
Yeah, yeah.
I'm glad to know that they're finally operational, so,
I'll take that off the agenda.
yes.
Next on the agenda, are we discussing the secretary election, or we're waiting until further progress on what's required by the?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point that can be, I mean, there's no action needed, as stated
Tabled.
last time. That's basically at this point, from the city attorney's perspective, there's no action needed on that. Again, it's just more of there's no official secretary position based on the informing document, so
I'll remain as assistant to the secretary then.
take that title.
Okay.
So we,
Well, actually, the secretary doesn't exist, so there would be no need for an assistant.
Okay.
we
Assistant
made a
should be
motion to
assistant.
table, and isn't there a formality to, Dan, were you saying we don't need it on the agenda at all? Is that what you're?
Yeah, because basically we looked into it, and since there's no, in the founding documents, that we could find that there was no official secretary position, and since John has not been acting in a secretary role other than just taking notes and doing agendas, there's no legal basis for that, so, as long as he just basically can call himself, the clerk or note taker or whatever else,
Right.
it's just,
And we can take this off the agenda.
Okay.
Before we go to others from the floor, whether there are any items that you wanted to add?
I just have an update. I did meet with MnDOT officials this week. We did have our meeting to kind of go over, Forest Lake Airport. Meeting was, we met out here at the Forest Lake City Center. It was about 4 or 5 different members of MnDOT staff. City attorney was there, and a representative from Bolton and Mink was there, just, to kind of help, answer any questions that came up from MnDOT side or from our side. Overall, meeting was very cordial. MnDOT did give assurances that they're not going to pull funding from the airport. They, kind of gave me the assurance that we just invested quite a bit of money in there. We want to make sure that, you keep operations, going moving forward. They're committed to helping the Forest Lake Airport and the city of Forest Lake operate a successful airport. The main thing is that they kind of reached out as being resources for if you have specific questions on how things work or how aeronautics work or how kind of everything kind of interplays from the city level to the federal level to the state level. They said they're there to be resources. They said one of the things that they recommended doing, kind of moving forward is to really dive into those aeronautical use standards. They said that's probably an area where, as airports kind of transition, and they kind of looked at Forest Lake Airport in a time of transition from, grass runway to hardtop runway. They said that's a time where, uses could change, how the airport is, the airport itself is just being, viewed from other pilots coming in because there's now a different type of runway there. More demand because we are seeing more calls for people wanting to rent hangars out now or put hangars up than there was in the past. So they say this is not uncommon to see airports as they kind of evolve to kind of get into this, need to kind of evolve their standards as well. So they kind of suggested is to go through and do an update to the aeronautical use standards. They also offered resources where as these get developed, they'd be willing to kind of weigh in, provide other examples of how other airports have done this. I mean, they said they manage airports all over the state of Minnesota. They said we've kind of seen all the situations, all the issues that are out there, and they're willing to kind of, be that resource for the city, for the airport commission to kind of get, to make sure that the standards that are there, are in line with how other cities are doing or how other airports are being managed. I mean, a couple of things that they brought up were, some airports have standards on, inside hangars in terms of airplanes, the aeronautical use part. They want planes that are functional. They don't want basically people putting hangars up there and putting in 4 planes that are in various states of repair because they want to sell fuel. They want to encourage activity. They want to encourage flying in and flying out. So they said that's something that to kind of consider the aeronautical use, kind of help to guide, the actual use of the airport. And they said, again, it just kind of helps, chart the course for the current, operations and as well as future operations. Because again, I think when those current standards were adapted, I mean, the airport looked a lot different than it does now, and as such, you kind of want to refresh those. So they kind of suggested that was their first step and was going through the aeronautical use standards and, getting a good one of those, in place and approved. And then, from there we can kind of go back forward and get to the next level of operations.
The copy of the letter that I received that you got and you sent out, they were very concerned about the significant non-aeronautical operations out at this airport. And they're going to let that go and they're absolutely not following the law?
Well, when I spoke with them, about it, and, in terms of aeronautical use, I mean, it's again, broad brush strokes. If you look at the extreme ends of the spectrum, it's pretty easy. But when you start getting in the nuance of differences where you can argue back and forth, that's where they said your aeronautical use standards help to define that use. So they said, if you sit and you speak in broad terms, pretty easy black and white terms, but a lot of this is, the aeronautical use standards and guide, those actual operational principles of the airport.
If they let that go, they're going to have a problem over the whole state. And I can't believe they're going to ignore it.
Well,
I can't believe that. They are afraid of people using state funds to run their businesses. And they got to compete with people out there that don't have that. I mean, I've heard this guy here who runs that motorcycle thing tell me that 2 of his buddies wanted to come out there and do the same thing because it was so economical to be out there. And that's going to open it wide open.
But this is why MnDOT came out and met with Mr.
Right,
Mendez
Right,
on
but
this-
they
on
didn't
this
do
subject.
anything.
Well, I guess to the point is, it's like we did. We said we got to establish aeronautical use because if we have loose aeronautical use standards at the airport, you could argue either way. And right now, it just says 50%. In define aeronautical, and it says 50% of just aeronautical use. We don't have that. Is it active plane? Is it plane wing? Is it just part of a plane? Is it a propeller? Because you could potentially argue if you had a bunch of aeronautical parts in the hangar, that could potentially be argued as aeronautical use.
The letter says non-aeronautical uses, and it states that. And it doesn't say anything about percentages or anything. It just
Right,
says
but
you
our
can't do it. The law says that you can't do it.
The standards that I've received that have, from what I understand, were approved at some point when I was going through the documents and the documents I have, at the airport say 50% aeronautical use. That's what I have. Again, they're very loose standards, I will fully admit, which is why if we're going to go through this exercise, we need to start defining aeronautical use more defined. So when you go out there to do an inspection and go out there to make sure somebody's in compliance, that you have a set of standards to match up to, where it's not so much this one person's interpretation, other person's. You want to try to get that framed out so you know. So not only from an enforcement perspective, but also from a hangar owner perspective. You want to know if I put something in a corner, is that allowed?
Exactly. I
You
mean,
know.
they're going at it from an aeronautical use and a non-aeronautical use perspective. A business could be considered, a non-aeronautical business is no different than a non-aeronautical something in the hangar, whether that's a travel
The
trailer.
law
or-
says you have to have an airplane in there, it has to be used for aeronautical use. The rest of the hangar, you can do what you want, as long as it's not commercial business that's being run out of it.
But how does that seems to go against what that chapter 360 section, I don't have it right in front of me.
I think to kind of take it down to the level is that to go out and in terms of making sure everybody maintains in compliance is that you want to make sure that this does not open it up because like what one person may view, if you have like a box of storage items or a car or a boat or whatever in there, the argument could be that's non-aeronautical use as well,
Exactly.
It's the defining, and the reality of it is that
But it's not a business port, it's not a business that people are running out of there. That's the difference. If you can run your business out of there, then why wouldn't anybody fill them up and not pay the commercial rates that everybody else out here on the outside has to pay?
For clarification, there's no business being run out of my hangar.
What do you call making gelato?
Running a business is,
Oh, come on, Rick.
oh, give me a breakdown. I just want to make sure that it's clarified that Daniela goes in there and she makes gelato.
For a commercial business.
Correct. And I
So-
was concerned enough about the lease that I asked for approvals and I got the ability to use 5% of the hangar, which is non-aeronautical. And I just want to make sure, you can't say she runs her business from her office and from her shop down on Lake Drive.
So
She
then-
doesn't run it from my hangar or from our hangar. Well, I just want to make sure that there's clarification of the words
Well,
on
I
that
can't
particular
see how the state can allow a business in the place when it says it can't. It can't be done, and I don't see how the city can give you permission when it isn't legal. Could they just make a law, whether it's legal or not, and give you permission?
Well, I think that on that point, that's what we're trying to do with these standards
Exactly.
and with this review, is to make
Exactly.
sure that we establish these guidelines, because obviously when we go out to these situations, if we don't have the code behind us, if we don't have the standards behind us, if we don't have the law behind us, then we go in there and then it just basically becomes opinion and opinion and opinion, and we're trying to get a fact set so when hangar owners come in, they know what to expect, is to protect the hangar owners as much as it is to make sure that we're not having businesses run in a fashion. I mean, that's what we're trying to
Just
establish
like you have
with
to
these
do for
standards.
conditional
We
use
addressed
permits.
this several months ago, and this man here, Mr. Dahlbeck, said, yeah, I'm running a business out of there and I'm gonna keep doing it. That's his words. He was right here when he said it.
I'm just at, when I had conversations with, I'm reiterating what MnDOT basically, what we kind of talked about. I said, if we can get aeronautical use standards, if we can get this thing buttoned up, I mean, I get the fact that we need to make, I'm trying to get the pathway there so we're consistent across the board, just not making a reaction because, I mean, the code right now, the language right now is very open. You can interpret it both ways. Your interpretation or somebody else could come in there and interpret it a different way. We're trying to frame that out so when hangar owners go in there, they know what to expect.
According to the letter I wrote from the DOT, they didn't think it was open. They said it was being violated.
I didn't
I
quite
didn't
get
see
that from the letter. I got from the MnDOT's letter that they were kind of reaching out to the city to lend a hand and offer assistance
That's
and guidance.
That was
There are
reiterated
a
again.
couple of significant non-aeronautical related operations located at the Forest Lake Airport. This subdivision, 360, 305,
Governs that.
it, and it does not allow it. And it continued use could jeopardize state funding, and I sure don't want to see the state funding jeopardized over something like
To
this.
that point, that was brought up during the conversation. I said, look, I don't want to jeopardize state funding either, but I want to make sure that we get on a pathway that's fair and equitable to all. And I said, if we start doing aeronautical use, get these things framed in, does that meet our, I don't want you coming in 2 months saying we're pulling funding. And they said, no, if you start going down this pathway, they said, that's what you need to do to make sure that you stay in compliance so the funding is not going to be jeopardized.
So as a commission, we need to go forward with more clearly defining
Exactly.
aeronautical use.
But as that comes up too, think about it from today's perspective, but also think about it from what you think the airport's gonna look like. And, I mean, it's tough to predict, I will fully admit that, but you wanna make sure standards are there. So if you're trying to encourage flying, you may not wanna basically allow 5 airplanes that aren't, you wanna make sure there's a functional airplane in there, because that's how some airports encourage, an active airport. So I mean, those are the conversation pieces, along with everything else that's in that mix that needs to be defined. So it's protecting the hangar owners, so they know when they come in, you can say, okay, can I put this in the corner of my hangar, or is somebody gonna come in and based on the whim that day, think this is not allowed in this corner of the hangar? Because, from what I was told, now, I didn't verify this, but FAA standards is basically you have a plane, that's it. Very, very minimal outside of just a plane. They're kind of on the far end of the extreme, and MnDOT basically said, we're kind of allowing a little bit of flexibility because they realize that hangar owners make a big investment in their hangars.
And there's gonna be other stuff
So
in
we can
there.
go along being a little bit pregnant.
Well, I mean,
I am almost pregnant.
So, chapter 360, 305, subdivision 4, D, which has been referenced by people at several different ways. It says, to receive aid under this section, the municipality must enter into an agreement with the commissioner giving assurance that the airport will be operated and maintained in a safe, serviceable manner for aeronautical purposes only, for the use and benefit of the public. It uses aeronautical purposes. It doesn't state non-aeronautical businesses or non-aeronautical things. It says for aeronautical purposes. And Dan, I quite frankly believe you're going down the right path that says that aeronautical uses have to be defined. Not unlike when I sat on the council or on the town board, you couldn't issue a conditional use permit, and then the conditions that went with the conditional use permit had to be defined enough in order to use it to monitor it as that was in force. And the same type of a thing here. You have to have aeronautical uses defined so that you can manage going forward.
and I think, that's what we discussed. It was like they were willing to help, and I think that was key, but they also said, we're not gonna draft them for you. You have to draft them, and that's what they said. The city has the ability to work with the airport commission to draft the standards, because they realize that the way Forest Lake Airports operate is probably a little bit different than the way Halifax Airport operates, but they're both airports, So they allow for that bit of local control, so henceforth, that's where we have to go forward and define what that actually looks like, to make sure, again, it's fair for everybody.
The number that we're talking about, the 360-305, the city agreed to that when they took money from the state. And they've taken money from the state. And that was part of the agreement when they took the money from the state.
To that point, I'd have to go back to the agreement, I'd have to go back to the statute, I'd have to consult with the attorney, because now we're getting into I'm just looking at it from the perspective, I'd have to do the full, open the whole thing up, because, I'm not saying that you're wrong, I'm just saying that I would need to make sure that that's all, the attorney was there when we spoke with MnDOT, to make sure that, we were operating in a manner that kept us in compliance, and, this is the path that we kind of landed on. This is the advice that we received. I'm just relaying that advice as was presented.
Don's definition of having an airplane in your hangar and then other stuff, I think that's what your definition is the one that's used at New Richmond. And the reason that they do that is they don't measure square footage, of how much the airplane takes up or anything like that. They just have an operational airplane.
I specifically asked the
Right.
state, and they said, we won't care as long as you don't run commercial operation out there. You can do anything you want in the hangar. We want an airplane in there, and we want aeronautical use. Because I explained, I said, why would we build these big hangars if all we can do is put in one little airplane, and you wouldn't get the tax base here that you've gotten? So it makes sense as long as you put the restrictions that are already in place there. And you can't sign an agreement and then not go by the agreement. And the city signed that agreement with the state. It's just like our leases out there. There's nothing in our lease that says you can do what you're doing to us, but you just decided to do it. So when is somebody gonna start doing what's right?
I mean, I guess from the city's perspective, we've reached out to MnDOT. I had a meeting with MnDOT. I kind of get a path together. I'm not saying, I mean, here's the options that we can go down. I mean, if you want something that's going to be, that's going to stand up in a court of law, we have to go through and kind of get some of the stuff defined. I mean, that's kind of the advice that I've been received by those who, work at MnDOT, and this is the advice that they give when I met with them, was they're saying, your aeronautical use standards is a very good place to start for situations such as
As her
this.
letter states, it says that right in there in the agreement, and that's what you're supposed to follow. And all of a sudden, well, we gotta figure out a way that we want so we can go around the law.
It's
And we
not
do
going
this
around the law.
constantly.
It's not going around the law. It's defining what that use is. That's what we're trying to do. Because again, they say aeronautical use is an intentionally gray area. They don't want to come in and say, we could go back to, I mean, like I said, FAA, if you want to go completely back and, from what they told me, 90-10, 90% only airplane, you can put a little bit in the corner, Now, again, I don't know, I mean, I didn't verify those numbers, but that's what that was batted about, was pretty extreme on this side, versus you make, the hangar owners make the investment in order to protect what you do with that other part that's not around the plane. You'd want some sort of protection there, saying if I put a car in the corner to store it in the wintertime, that somebody's not gonna come here and tell me I have to get it out. That's what these standards are there for too. It's to also protect the hangar owners, to say, if I put X, Y, and Z in there, I'm allowed to do so because I've made the investment in my hangar. And as long, if I have a plane in there, that's what we're trying to establish.
All that's in question is that the law says that you can't run a commercial business out of there. And by this guy's own admission, that's what he's doing. He's making gelato out there. He might not sell it out there because there isn't any customers, but he's making it out there. So he's running a commercial business, no matter what you call it.
We used to have people that would come and taste it. Dan, what you're saying is, based on your meeting with the state, that we really are on a path where we have to define aeronautical use in order to handle the disagreements that are occurring about what the uses are out there. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, that's what the assumption, that they said that becomes, and again,
We're down that path. We can't.
All we're
we
talking
can't walk
about
away
is
from that.
commercial use.
Well,
Private commercial use. That's all we're talking about here.
everything that I've read here is aeronautical, and aeronautical is indifferent to private or
It
commercial.
says non-aeronautical related. Now, how do you relate making gelato to aeronautical use?
Saying that chapter 360, 305 refers to aeronautical use. It doesn't refer to businesses. The letter that she wrote references two substantial non-aeronautical operations, and if you look at the letter, it says it in those words.
Yeah.
And what I would like to know, Don, is how did she become aware of this?
I don't know. She
But-
runs a
but wait
the
a minute.
business. She probably knows what's going
Yeah,
on.
but wait a minute. You brought up the fact that that letter arrived before we at the Airport Commission even had that letter in front of us.
It said
So how
March
did you know-
26th, and I
No,
didn't
no,
get
I
the
was
letter
asking
until
you a question, Don.
last
I
month.
was asking you a
Gentlemen, the primary concern of the commission was the risk of losing MnDOT funding of the airport with non-aeronautical use. And MnDOT has come to us with 4 or 5 representatives and said, well, that's not an immediate imminent risk right now of losing that funding, as long as we're on the path of defining what aeronautical use is in our hangars, and that they're there to lend a hand in that process.
they're there to assist. And that's what they said. You develop draft standards, we'll review them, we'll give our recommendations on them. If it's too strict, not strict enough, where can we button these up to make sure that the standards are agreeable?
Right, so that's the path we need to go down forward. There's the imminent risk that was a concern, or is a concern, is not there based on that meeting. That as long as we are proceeding down the path of defining our own aeronautical use.
Correct, and like I said at the end, I said I'm not going to put words in MnDOT's mouth.
Sure.
I
Oh,
said,
no,
I'm
I
going to try to
understand.
summarize a fair statement from what happened, and I said, is it fair if I say if we go down, we start going down the path to get this, so instead of being here on the the scale of compliance, we're right smack dab in the middle. I said, is that, you're not gonna pull funding? They said, that's a fair statement to make.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's where we landed, I mean, I don't wanna say, one way or the other,
Right.
they said that's fair.
Understood.
So,
Yeah.
that, the threat of pulling funding out, we are taking the steps required, that they
Right.
realize that, we are going down the
It's a
right.
process that almost every airport, I'm sure, goes through.
Has
it,
to,
and,
has
you
to.
know, as it
Absolutely.
grows. So, did you have anything? I always look over here and I don't see.
The only thing I would like to add is prior to the, Rick, how long have you been running that gelato thing out there?
Running?
Well, how long has it been in operation?
I believe it was 2011 is when we asked for approval, and then we made some modifications to have the
Okay, and
machine.
Tim Dahlbeck, how long has he been doing his motorcycle thing out of there?
I
Anybody
really
got an
don't.
idea?
Since he built his hangar.
So my question is, until this $280 fiasco happened, all of this was just fine with everybody. So what is the real reason that we are now at odds with coal hangar owners? That was never a problem before. It's not a safety issue. It's not causing any problem to the other hangar owners. I don't understand why we're here, other than somebody wants to take a vendetta out against somebody else.
That started
And
when
my-
the vendetta was taken, that started when the vendetta started with I forget the guy's name now, but he got permission from the Airport Commission to build a hangar out there. And when he went to get his permit here, he was told that Rick Ashback said, we're not issuing any more permits until it's changed. Then he got attorney involved that didn't know anything about it, made up a new contract that didn't make any sense. And that's when Nodder got upset about it, because he's being discriminated against. We had leases going out there, they were running good, and he stopped it. And that's when it started.
And I,
And that was part of the
but I wanna-
gelato. He got up and complained about the gelato stuff.
I
my,
want to go back to the original. Is it causing something that is inhibiting other hangar owners, a safety issue for your aircraft on taxiways? Why is this a huge issue? Is what I'm saying. And if we want to establish aeronautical uses, I guess you want to take it to the letter of the law and make it black and white. You say, well, then nothing but an operational aircraft should be in that hangar. Period. Now everybody's in the same boat. I'm sure none of you guys
No,
want
we're
that.
talking about two different things. We're talking
Well, no,
about a
it'll come to
commercial
that,
business,
though.
and we're talking about what you can store in your own hangar.
I understand that.
And-
But I also understand that for 10-plus years, there were no issues.
It was brought to the attention when that lease was changed, and this guy got discriminated against. And Parrish was in on it, he was in on it.
Nodder came in with a hangar with 2 garage doors in the back, a hangar door in the front. Not Airport Commission members, I can't remember who, I believe I might have asked. I can't remember who else, what the purpose, what, he indicated, I don't remember my question, but he indicated he have 6 classic cars in there. I know questions were asked of him that, is he a pilot, does he have an airplane, so on and so forth, and he wasn't a pilot, he's not actively taking lessons, and he didn't, but he indicated that he would sometime in the future.
But he also said that he did have some dual instruction. He couldn't have a logbook to prove that dual instruction. He didn't remember the date of that dual instruction, and he didn't remember the CFI that gave him that dual instruction.
And up
The president-
until.
Well, I was on the com- I-
One more point. Up until this point in time, everybody had demonstrated through N numbers and airplane ownership of the fact that they had ownership, as those leases were taken down. And that's the point that's the part I brought up forward. To me, it seemed clear that it was more about storing cars and less about, no demonstration like everything else was in the past, that there was an airplane involved.
I was
The
on the
Airport
commission.
Passed that for him to go get a permit, and then you took it on your own self to change it and stop it. And that's when he got upset and was gonna sue you about it. And the guy come in, I remember the meeting. He said, I'm 50 years old, I got the capabilities to get into flying. I've always wanted to learn how to fly. I got the wherewithal to buy an airplane, to build a hangar, and do the rest of it. And there wasn't any reason. We told him to go get his permit. And then you got into it with him and said, we're not gonna let you store a piece of rusty shit in the corner.
I did not say that.
Yes,
sir.
you did.
No, don't tell me what I said if
Okay,
you weren't
guys.
there at the meeting.
He didn't make it up.
You can't enter into a contract with violations to start with. If you had no airplanes, no demonstrated aircraft with that lease.
So that's what we're talking about tonight. Entering into a contract with a violation against a state statute.
Did you have anything else?
No, I'm just concerned that we're wasting so much time over this.
I agree with you.
Between council meetings and airport commission meetings on something that was never an issue going for 10 years, 11 years.
Right.
And then we have a falling out amongst friends, and we're arguing over a vendetta, not over whether what's
No,
right.
we're
Yes, we are.
we're
not
arguing-
arguing, let me finish. We're not arguing over what's best for the airport, what's best for all the hangar owners out there. And that's what we should be doing.
We're arguing over a transgression on our leases to start with.
As you interpret it.
No, as the law interprets it. Can't you read the contract? Tell me where it is in my contract that you can do what you're doing to us. It is not in there. And I've read it 100 times. And I've asked the city for 2 years now to tell me where it is, and they can't tell me. And you still do it. So don't tell me it's a vendetta. That's what happened.
We're going to move on.
Okay?
Others from the floor? Anyone from the floor? Mr. Schultz.
Mr. Chair, I've got two items also.
Oh, I'm
No,
sorry.
no, Mr. Schultz is first.
Good. Mr. Schultz go first.
Good evening. I see access to the north end of the airport has been limited some. That one of the things that I had requested to occur has. That's great. Basically, they put a Jersey barrier in the driveway in front of Kay's house, and then they moved the gate further out toward the highway on the other driveway entrance. At Kay's house, they could use one more Jersey barrier. I already know it's been driven around. It's pretty easy to drive around that. So they could use one more. I was wondering what the status of the street light at Hangar E was. I thought 2 meetings ago it was agreed to that the commission supported moving the street light from where the gate was down to Hangar Echo. Approximate cost that I had come up with was $1,200 and some for that move. I thought it was agreed to. Can you tell me what the status is?
We are still waiting, we had to confirm back with our Excel contact to make sure, and we're still waiting to get those quotes back. We've followed up with them, but have not got the hard numbers yet.
Okay.
That's the discussion, we just needed to do our due diligence to make sure that number was holding on that, and the estimates, we're waiting to hear back on the estimate for that.
And so when that information comes back, then it will be brought to the city council? Is that kind of it, or is that small enough that it's within?
I can't speak to it, I'll have to get the amount back, at this point.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm just wondering if it made it to the council or where it stands. Okay. Also, some Class 5 gravel had been put out by the Hangar Echo. Most of it was used on the south side. If another couple dump trucks full shows up, we could sure use it. It's much better, but it's still kind of wet, and the north side and west end haven't been worked on very much. But it is an improvement. Thanks for getting it out there. That was all I had.
Thank you. Anyone else from the floor? Mr. Schmidt.
A couple of things. Our printer is out of paper in the pilot's lounge, and so I went to get more paper. I looked in the desk. There wasn't a ream of paper in there. I can get us a ream of paper, no problem. I thought there was a ream of paper in the file cabinet in the printer in the computer room. I go to the file cabinet, it's locked.
Right.
Do you have the key?
There is a key for it.
And you've got the key?
Yeah, I've got a key for it.
Okay, is there paper in there?
No, there's no paper in there.
Okay, but we're gonna keep that locked and you're gonna be the keeper of the key?
Yeah, there are some documents that were in there.
Okay.
Airport related.
Okay, real good. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, you finish and
I'll get us some more paper, no big deal. New Richmond this year has record fuel sales. They have never sold as much fuel as they're selling this year. They are at $4.69 a gallon. I think our price is competitive with that. I stopped at Stevens Point on the way back from Oshkosh and bought Avgas for $3.69 a gallon, which I still can't believe. I think that might have been an Oshkosh special. But if you look at our price on, it's either AirNav or ForeFlight, we are very competitive with the local area, and I want to keep it that way. I want people to come into Forest Lake and give us their revenue, and if we can sell it at a profit for our current price, we're in great shape. Mr. Schultz is right, I did look, and there have been drive-arounds on that Jersey barrier, and I noticed it also. And I was wondering about a security fence around the airport, and that's going to cost a lot of money, and it's way down the road, but it really is the solution to security at the airport. It would prevent all that stuff from happening. That's it.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Go ahead.
I do have one thing. I live over on Everton on Clear Lake, and my neighbors to the, I guess it'd be east of me, I asked them since, because they did not like my vote on the hardtop runway at all, because they don't like the noise from the aircraft. They said, that's just going to bring more airplanes, more noise, more whatever. Make the long and short of it, since the parachute people are no longer operating out of the noise level has dropped to zip. And then since you kind of put like a gentleman's agreement that people taking off over the lake
Yes.
would at least get to the freeway before they
Yes.
turn left.
Right.
Well, Friday, 2 bi-wingers, one red and white checkered, one black and white, doing touch and goes, I think. They no sooner got airborne right across this guy's house, right across this guy's house. Can you look in, you must know who those people are, but whoever they are, they need to be told you got to get out further. Because I don't want to, I mean, we've been, no noise complaints, nothing, it's been good. And I don't want to kick that all up again. But I mean, they barely get airborne, I watched them. And as soon as he got enough altitude, he's hanging a left turn and over.
Right over the houses.
Yeah.
If I see them, I'll say something.
So I'm assuming you guys would know those aircraft, but.
Don't.
Yeah, I don't.
But they were out there Friday, or more than one takeoff and landing.
Afternoon, evening?
Yeah, because I was out working on, it was afternoon, because I was working on my yard.
Okay.
But I thought, geez, look at this timing, just when I said everything's going good, you know, like, it's not so good. But
Yeah,
anyways,
as a courtesy, the
Yeah, as a
pilots
courtesy,
should be
just say, hey,
reminded to make
you
their
know,
turns out.
get out over the lake and
highway.
over the highway, who cares? you know?
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Mr. Ashbeck, did you have something else?
Two things. The fuel price, I saw that we must have gotten a load of fuel and the price went up to $4.61. I know that they have been looking at surrounding airports to try to be competitive and
They
draw some
are.
business, which they have been, and we've seen it in the budget and the revenues. The other thing was I was reading an article where MnDOT is changing up Dan, I'm gonna give this to you, but they're changing up when the M&O grant offers come out. Maybe they even talked to you about it. Anyhow, it's gonna be January of '19, and they need them back sooner than they have in the past. So I'll give this to you so that you have it, just for awareness.
M&O
It
is-
specifically says that if you don't get those letters approved and back to us, you're not gonna get your M&O money, and we just talked about the importance of it, so,
Maintenance and operations.
yes. So, that's all I had.
All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
A second?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries, meeting adjourned.